That was a horrible slur against Brian.
Just a little bit, I have to say.
Hello, listeners, and welcome to episode 53 of Bad Voltage. And I'm just going to start this one off with a quick apology. I'm probably exceedingly difficult to understand in this episode and not quite as clear of mind as I typically am because I seem to have come down with a little case of the bubons. So I'm sure I'll be better by next show.
The bubons.
Yeah, the bubons is worse.
So the most adorable way to say bubonic in the whole world.
You like that? Yeah.
It is. It's like a little kind of like squeaky teddy bear saying it.
It makes it sound not quite so
I'm
bad.
just glad you didn't get the AIDSy wadesy.
No, you don't want that. That's bad news.
Yeah.
Bad news bears.
Yeah,
so with that out of the way...
Cancer wancer.
Cancer wancer. What are we going to talk about, guys?
Well, we are going to start off by talking about Vigilante malware. Malware that gets into your computer and like cleans stuff up and, you know, leaves you a little mint on the pillow, that sort of thing.
We're also going to talk to Frank Karlitschek from Owncloud, which is both an open source project as well as a company, about what Owncloud is and why it's pretty actually quite cool.
I'm going to ask the question why we're not spending time introducing laws mandating open source rather than fighting against laws which try and stop it.
Word.
And that was internally called fighting fire with fire, which doesn't really count if one person has a match and the other has a flamethrower. But other than that, we're going to talk about the growing trend of very little computers such as the PocketChip and Raspberry Pi and what that enables moving forward and if these things are cool for people who aren't us.
Awkward.
A little
segue.
bit. A little bit. And now, Bad Voltage. So recently, I think we'd all agree there's been a growing trend of inexpensive, small devices that are really capable of running a full Linux stack. Things like the Raspberry Pi and the PocketChip, which Brian actually introduced me to. I was not familiar with that. It's a $9 chip that basically is a whole computer. The DragonBox Pyra, which is a follow-up to the Open Pandora gaming machine, and a whole wide variety of other things on Kickstarter and elsewhere that really are enabling a new wave of devices and almost a new ecosystem. If you look at things like the Arlo, really it's just a Raspberry Pi and some Arduino stuff and stuff like that. So the one question I had and I think could be interesting is these devices are obviously cool for a group of people like us.
So cool.
Are they cool for
Super
a group
cool.
of people that aren't us? Will these enable things in the broader non-technical community? And do you think other people care about this kind of stuff? And will they enable things that maybe weren't possible before?
The thing that gets me really jazzed about this kind of stuff is that, frankly, while I find it interesting to read and talk about this kind of stuff, I'm not really in the demographic that's going to sit down and build something with a Raspberry Pi or something like that. It's not really my deal. But the thing I love is the fact that these tools, it's not my deal. But the thing I love is that we've got this really fascinating intersection of open source, cheap computing devices like the Raspberry Pi, 3D printers for building cases and enclosures. Yep. We've got access to cheap clouds and private clouds where you can offload a bunch of the data. It's just like, to me, it's a super exciting time for people who want to build interesting things. And in answer to your question, Jeremy, the reason why I think this is really cool is because we're going to start seeing really interesting devices like the Mycroft that we've raved about just popping up that will be intended towards general consumers. So I think consumers will benefit from the fact that people like us can be more creative and build interesting things, and they haven't had the typical things that have stood in the way, such as fabrication and production, stuff like that.
You know, I don't even really look at it from the homebrew standpoint because, yeah, I am the kind of guy that would sit down with a Raspberry Pi and build something stupid out of it. I mean, that's just my thing. I like toying around with that stuff. It's my deal. Right. But beyond that, like the PocketChip is a good example. The chip computer, for those who kind of missed the Kickstarter or Indiegogo or whatever crowdfunding thing it used, is a $9 super crazy tiny little computer, and it's fairly robust and powerful, especially considering its size, but it's $9 freaking dollars. And they have a version of it where they slap it onto a very small screen and a small little thumb physical keyboard with, you know, battery and whatnot. And it kind of almost looks like it doesn't even have a case. It looks like it's just a printed circuit board.
It does look like a cracked open Trio.
It's so great. But again, it is. Does anyone have it up right now for the?
It was like $48 or $49, I think.
For $49. So basically what you're getting is something that's kind of like an old Game Boy, right? Except for wicked powerful, can run basically a full version of a Linux operating system, do all sorts of crazy stuff, play games, do your personal information management, all that good stuff for a very low cost, which means I can take one with me everywhere I go and not give a crap if I break it. I can give one to my daughter and not give a crap if she breaks it. It's so awesome that we have these crazy cheap, crazy small, mega powerful machines that can run full Office suites that are super powerful, powerful. They can run LibreOffice. We can run LibreOffice on a $40-some in our pocket, doesn't even really have a case computer. And that's so friggin' awesome. I feel like there should be more of that in this world. And to answer Jeremy's question about whether or not the average person is going to care about this, I legitimately couldn't give a rat's ass. I want this in my life so badly, and I want my family to have these sorts of things, not just the pocket chip, but, you know, people are building Raspberry Pi based tablets with the new 7-inch kind of screen that they've came out with, and people are putting those sorts of things together. I want one of those. The DragonBox Pyra, which is the new version of the Open Pandora, which is really kind of like a Nintendo DS. It's kind of a clamshell, flip open gaming console. It's a little more expensive, but it's got a full keyboard in the flip out part with next to the game controllers. So it actually doubles as like basically a cell phone essentially without the phone part. It's like a
which
PDA
is your favorite
plus
kind of
game device plus laptop. And I want more of this. I want my whole life to be filled with these super crazy cool little goodies. I want all my pockets and my jackets full of them. I want to stick them in my pants. I want to just have them just falling off of me as I walk around all day long. And the fact that you can get these crazy ones like the PocketChip for $40-some, that's just insane. Yeah. And to me, it is the holy grail. It is what we have wanted for so long, because I know I've been talking for like a million years on this, I know, but I know in the last decade or so, haven't all of us sat down with our friends and thought, man, I just wish there was like these awesome little devices. I wish there was an awesome stick it in my pocket device that was kind of like a cell phone, but also was basically a full desktop in my pocket. And, tablets kind of met that, but not completely. And now that we're getting all these options together and they're open source and they're open hardware and they're mega cheap, I feel like that time has finally come for the nerds of the world who have been searching for these sorts of ridiculous devices. And now we're getting them. And that just freaking gives me the most strange erection ever. And I love it so much.
And I think another thing that's really neat here is before to prototype a new device was really difficult, right? Especially at the PCB level, where now things like the Mycroft are using Raspberry Pis. But I don't know if you guys saw the announcement a couple of days ago now, I think, that Element 14 is actually doing custom Raspberry Pis now.
Yes.
So you can have any completely different PCBs, completely different connectors. You can add things, subtract things if you want a cheaper cost. So for someone like Mycroft to be able to have to do nearly no engineering work and get a reliable, cheap board that they can do whatever they want with, really should enable whole new classes of devices at very reasonable prices. And that's awesome. That's really cool.
What's really cool as well is that the thing that really gets me jazzed is that there's different open source groups are solving different parts of essentially the tool chain independently. So, for example, on one hand, you've got the Raspberry Pi side of things. On the other hand, you've got people building cheaper and cheaper open 3D printers. But then you've got things like OpenStack, and you've got things like Fuzzy IO, which is building pluggable machine learning and artificial intelligence. And the amalgamation of these things is just ridiculous. I mean, it's going to be super exciting to see. I did a talk about this at All Things Open, that I don't know, when you guys first got into Linux, it was probably like me. It was just a light bulb went off of this world of kind of electronic collaboration that's really exciting. But our tool that we had was a computer connected to an internet connection. And for Jack, when my son grows up, he's going to have low-cost computing, artificial intelligence, 3D printing, drones. And it's like that when he has that aha moment, when he's 15 or 16 or 18 or whatever, he's going to have so much more of a palette to paint with. Yep. It's just super cool. I don't know why you're leaving X Prize. You are Diamandis. But yeah,
let's be honest. If Diamandis came out and was saying those sorts of things, I would be much more excited about the entire thing.
I think I would agree with all of those points. I mean, on the one hand, I'm kind of with Bryan here in that I don't really care whether the world finds it useful. I'll find it useful, and that's really handy. Thank you very much. Bring me new things to play with. But
it's odd that you two don't care about that question, because Jono and I this week skipped the planning session. Not to cut you off, but this is ironic. Jono and I skipped the planning session this week because we both had other previous engagements, and just Bryan and Stuart came up with the topics for this particular show.
We
in
sure
the notes
did.
for what this segment is about, the last sentence is literally, and I'm being serious here, are these things cool for people who aren't us? That's the question for the segment.
Okay. I think asking the question is important because, in part, I knew what me and Stuart's answers were, and I kind of wanted to hear what you guys thought of this. You know, me and Stuart are not normal people. We are abnormal in every sense of the word. And so it doesn't really matter if we think these are cool or not. It matters what you guys think.
All I know is that you guys just got frickin' owned by Jeremy.
Finishing my earlier point, because I was cut off, I also agree with Jono. Right, the more cool stuff that I can do myself, people like me will build cool things. I mean, we talked about. You remember KDE did the Vivaldi tablet or whatever it was called, and ran into all kinds of problems because building hardware is really hard and much harder than you think.
Really difficult.
But in a world in which you can just go and buy a $9 chip or a Raspberry Pi and then 3D print a plastic enclosure, and then you've got a Minecraft, makes it possible for people to build Minecraft without having to spend the rest of their lives learning how to talk to people in Shenzhen.
Yes.
Yeah. This is brilliant in every conceivable manner.
Recently, there have been a series of reports about Vigilante malware. There's specifically, I'm referring to an article over on the Linux Journal that we were reading and thinking, this is friggin' crazy, yet awesome, yet horrible. The idea is simple. Create a piece of malware that does good in the world. Or at least good in the eyes of the people who make it. So a piece of malware that would say, infect a system, spread itself, and do work to remove other pieces of malware that might be doing bad things. This is a crazy idea, an absolutely awesome idea, and I don't really know what I feel about this idea. So I wanted to pose it to you guys. What is the thought here? If you have, let's see, what is this one called? The Wifatch?
Wifatch.
The Wifatch malware. So on Linux systems, we have a piece of malware now to do good in the world. Is that good or bad? Do you want there to be malware out there trying to protect you without you knowing it? I'm very curious.
So it seemed like this is mostly aimed, and I just did a little bit of reading on it, at like Internet of Things devices and routers, correct?
Yeah, yes, correct. And Wi-Fi is aimed at embedded devices primarily.
The one thing that I found that was interesting about how it spreads is that it doesn't use a backdoor, it doesn't use a 0-day, it doesn't break in any way, really. It just looks for stupid username password combos and tries them, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah,
which I thought is interesting, and then it changes the password and
other malware. You know, I mean, it's just
quite a few of those use some kind of exploit involved.
But I mean, this could evolve to using an exploit. What if this did? I mean, whether it's really exploiting stupidity or exploiting a bug, either way, it's exploiting something, getting its way into your systems, making its way into your routers, and doing what it wants to do. It's a virus. It's malware. But
realistically, if my router gets infected with actual malware, and it turns out that it's taking all of my credit card data data as it passes through the router and shipping it off to some site in Russia, I'm not going to go, oh no, it's okay because it exploited the fact that I left the admin password as admin rather than actually exploiting a bug.
So your friends
this is how malware spreads. I mean, the original internet worm, the Robert T. Morris worm, did exactly the same thing. It tried overflowing finger and stuff like that, but it also tried logging in with 15 different passwords or whatever, and this is just the same thing.
This whole thing, I get from reading I thought what was interesting in the article on the Linux Journal site was the last paragraph where it basically says, to me, Wifatch is more like a doctor who creeps into your house when you're asleep, silently injects you with the latest vaccines, throws away your cigarettes, and leaves a note in your fridge recommending a healthier diet.
Kind of.
And this kind of gets to the wider question of, is it okay to purposefully do things for other people that are probably, in their best interests without their consent? And you could apply this to malware, or you could apply it to that kind of pithy example of nicking someone's cigarettes. And honestly, there's we talk about a lot of things that are like a mixture of social and technology stuff, and I genuinely don't know. Right. Like, it's one of those things where part of me thinks, yeah, malware that does good things is kind of a good thing, right? Because most people in the world are not going to be securing their Internet of Things devices and their routers, and they will be wholly dependent on the people who build those platforms to do that for them. And those people,
and they've made it clear that they're not going to do that.
Right. And so the idea of something doing that, on one hand, feels like an okay thing, but on the other hand,
it feels
wrong.
It feels horrible.
Right?
And not only is it their intentions now seem
right?
good, but what happens when their control servers get compromised or their key gets stolen and actual malware gets pushed out, which seems inevitable to me.
You see, I mean, I wouldn't even go that far with it. It's not that it seems wrong; it is bloody wrong.
It is wrong.
This is, I mean, yes, I agree there are risks and so on, but the key point here is that you don't open this door. Right? Because of all the things that can go wrong in the future, yes, there is conceivably an argument that having this thing wander around people's routers and turn off Telnet and patch them so they don't have security bugs, this is what it does, right?
Let me ask you a question.
It kills other malware and it installs security patches and so on, and that's great, thanks very much, and fine, I can't trust Linksys to fix this for me, but I'm not sure I want to trust the guy in a basement to fix it for me either.
So, all right, let me ask you a question. Imagine you have a friend, hypothetically a friend, let's say he's called Jeremy, right? And let's say your friend Jeremy appears on the outside to be a perfectly normal, functioning member of society, maybe does a podcast from time to time.
Right.
But secretly, it is discovered while in Germany with this individual that he's got a raging meth addiction, right?
Right. It happens.
And then what you do is you're worried about his well-being. So what you do is you get in contact with his drug dealer behind his back and you threaten the shit out of him so he will not supply him with meth.
No.
By your logic, you're saying that's not okay to do.
That's threatening a meth dealer is so hilarious that the whole premise is ridiculous.
Thank you, Jeremy. I had an actual point to make, but I felt like someone needed to say that as well. So that's not at all the same thing. If we would apply that same scenario to technology terms, that would be like contacting the makers that make bad viruses and threatening them. This isn't that. We're not doing that. What it's doing is actually... This would be more like when Jeremy is asleep, injecting him with methadone and trying to work to like ease him off of meth or whatever without him knowing it.
Right. Let's use that as an example.
I mean, a closer analogy, I think, is it would be like if someone's front door was open, walking into their house, locking their door, and walking back out. Because that's basically what they're doing.
That's a great example.
But they're still entering your home unwelcome, unannounced.
Can the person who lives in that house be called Jeremy and still have a meth problem?
Yeah. In most examples, I think you would. Yeah.
Right.
So there's the thing. It's a horrible idea. The idea that someone is injecting code basically that I don't want and didn't say could be there onto my devices is awful and makes me pissed off and want to burn their houses down. However, if that little piece of malware actually ends up saving my butt and I didn't know about it, I'm going to want to high five the guy who did it. even though it would piss me off. I feel weird. I feel weird and conflicted and dirty and awful even just thinking about it, because I love vigilanteism in this regard, but I hate the idea that they're encroaching on my property. Like I can't handle it. I don't know which way to go.
Yeah. There's like a real kind of cold, hard, realistic perspective, I think, which we'd all agree is that this is wrong.
Right.
But then there's like a romantic kind of perspective, which is it's kind of cool as well.
Yeah.
But it is wrong.
It's totally wrong. It's illegal.
I suspect
it is not legal.
I suspect that Jono doesn't like it mostly because the official sources are in GitLabs and not GitHub.
Well, I did not know this.
So,
all right, end this segment.
So we're all pretty technical and hopefully keep our routers up to date and everything. I would be more curious what our parents think of something like this. Would our parents or any non-technical people be upset if someone kind of broke into their router, but not really, but disabled Telnet and secured it in a way? Do you think how do you think, and I guess this is just conjecture, but how do you think non-technical people would feel about this?
I'm pretty confident they wouldn't know that it had happened. Also, just to interject slightly, if Jono's upgraded his router, I will eat a hat, not one of my hats.
I'll have you know, I upgraded my router about a week ago.
Didn't help.
Right, that's reading this article.
I admittedly, it's because it wasn't working.
But yes, I mean, I am confident my parents would know. I mean, I'll be honest with you, I don't think I would know if my router got attacked by malware which exploited some kind of hole in it, went in and then patched it so it no longer had the hole and then deleted itself after spreading on. I don't think I would notice either, right?
Right.
But if you then went
I don't remember the last time I checked it.
Yeah, if I then rang up my parents and said, "Hey, guess what? There was software that some bloke wrote that you had no idea was there, which attacked your router to get in. It could have done anything, but out of the benevolence of its heart decided not to." I don't think they'd be very happy about it, regardless of the fact that it did good.
Now, what would you guys think if a piece of malware got into your router or your router, depending on who you are, and injected a piece of code that every time a web request came through for, say, any site that has to do with midget bowling or something like that, it automatically redirected you to a totally different website because the people are trying to protect you from the evils of midget bowling, right? They're trying to do good. They're trying to do good for you that you obviously can't do for yourself. So that really isn't any different than what this particular piece of malware, this Wifatch, does, really. So would you be okay with that, with someone coming in and doing that?
This is what I meant about
you guys just sit up at night thinking of weird scenarios?
Wait, what did Jeremy say? I think Jeremy might have been referencing midget bowling in some way, so I think we should focus on what Jeremy was talking about. Between the midget bowling
and the meth addicts, I just confused. You guys' analogies are bizarre. But anyways, carry on with your actual point there, Stuart.
Yeah, no, the thing here is, this is what I'm saying about you don't want to open this door. If you say, well, it's okay as long as this thing is doing good, then you end up in a big argument about whose definition of good you need to follow. Imagine, for example, that someone wrote Wifatch 2, which blocked access to porn sites. And you go, well, but we're protecting them from that. You say, well, okay, I can see the argument for that. The UK government tried to ban porn sites for the same reason. So you say, okay, what about if it blocks your access to ice cream? Because ice cream's bad for you. So what you don't have a thing where you say people are allowed to unilaterally stop me from having a thing because they think it's a good idea, even if currently you happen to agree that their idea of what's good and your idea of what's good agree. You shouldn't allow the concept of someone else being able to do that because it could be so brutally misused.
I think Stuart is brilliant, and he just figured out how to fix this whole scenario. We need people to go in, fork Wifatch, and make it so it blocks all access to porn and ice cream. Instantly, the uproar on the internet will say that these vigilante pieces of malware are awful, and we'll begin to fight against it. Problem solved.
Boom.
It's interesting. It reminds me. So last night, I watched a documentary on Netflix, which was pretty good. It was called, what was it called? The Hacker Wars. And it's basically about like the rise of hacktivism and things like LulzSec and all that kind of stuff. And it kind of danced around a similar question, which is, is it okay to do either civilly disobedient things or to build software that arguably acts in the best interests of people? And it raises the same kinds of questions. Like, is it okay for a hacktivist group to exploit security holes with, a company that's arguably doing pretty naughty things? And I always fall down on the same line, which is intellectually, I kind of sympathize and get it, but like I can rationalize it in different ways, but it feels wrong. It feels wrong, but I can rationalize.
So just so different.
You saying that leads to an interesting, separate but related question. Imagine the person who wrote Wifatch, whoever that is, who I assume has not gone public. I wasn't able to find it. Imagine that person hacked into servers at Linksys and found where they keep the firmware source code and added some patches to that source code to make it more secure and turn off Telnet by default and so on. So they weren't compromising individual people's routers, they were compromising it at the source. Linksys don't know they've done it, but it means that every Linksys router from now on that gets shipped has those security patches in. Is that an okay thing to do?
Man, I tell you what, if hackers did that, though, if that was like what hackers did, hackers would have a very different reputation in this world. That would be awesome. But all they did was going around breaking into Microsoft servers and making Windows just like a little bit better. Like, there's some bugs. Let's fix it for them and give it back to them. And that would be
this
awesome.
is the thing. I mean, you both Jeremy and Jono, there was no nuance then and no kind of, I'm not sure. That was like, no, that's not okay. Why is it okay for people to hack my dad's router but not Linksys who actually caused the problem?
I'm not saying it is. I said that it's not okay.
That's what I'm saying.
I don't think it's okay.
Yeah, but you're dubious about whether it's okay for the malware to attack my dad's router and patch that hole, but it's definitely not okay to actually fix the hole at Linksys.
No. I'm dubious about both counts. I have again the same intellectual rationalization of I can see the value in a hacker hacking into the Linksys site and patching their firmware so people download it and they get better firmware.
Right.
I can rationalize that, but it still feels wrong. In this, that's ultimately, I think that I would suggest that most people fall in that kind of perspective. Like I could make arguments for why it's a good thing, but it's still kind of my gut feels like it feels
a bit
wrong
crappy
thing to do.
Yeah.
Right. And so, but it's difficult because there's no hard and fast this is terrible what that person's doing. I mean, people who are hacking sites and exploiting innocent people's information and data and all the rest of it, you can very easily say that's just, it is wrong, it feels wrong. But this kind of is different. And I guess that's the reason why we're talking about it, right? I don't really know what else to say.
I think this guy or this girl probably means well, They're probably trying to do a good thing. But yeah, I agree with Stuart. Yeah. This is a door we should not open.
Yeah.
All right, now on the show we have Frank Karlitschek, who is the founder and maintainer of the Owncloud open source project, which also has a company attached to it where he serves as CTO. How are you doing, Frank?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have you on the show. I bumped into Frank at All Things Open in Raleigh, which is a fantastic conference, which I'm sure you'll hear me rambling about in other parts of the show, possibly already, because that's how we do this.
Probably.
Anyway, so, Frank, tell us what Owncloud is. I mean, we've covered this on the show before, but tell us what Owncloud is and why it's interesting to our listeners.
Oh, gosh, that's a big question. What is Owncloud? I mean, the elevator pitch I usually do is hey, it's like Dropbox or Google Drive or OneDrive or iCloud, but completely open source, and you can host it wherever you want. That's the elevator pitch. It's, of course, not completely true because Owncloud is a little bit more. Owncloud is also an application platform, so you can run all kinds of plugins and applications on top of Owncloud, and it's more than just synchronizing files as Dropbox. We also have calendar and contacts and notes and music streaming and bookmarks and all kinds of things. So by the end of the day, it's like a cloud service comparable to what Google and Dropbox and Box and all the others do, but it's HTTPL and can run wherever you want, like from a tiny Raspberry Pi or Linux box at home up to a big cluster if you're a really big organization.
Now, we talked about Owncloud. If I remember correctly, we I think each of us reviewed a different cloud service. And, when people talk, typically when I see Owncloud come up in conversation, it's typically within the context of people really raving about the privacy of Owncloud and the fact that it's for people who really care about privacy, that this is if not the best option, it's one of the best options.
Yeah.
How has privacy played a role in how you've constructed it? Has that been the major goal, or and privacy is a complex topic. Like, what has been the thinking behind how you've architected Owncloud moving forward?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So the thing is that, I don't know, this whole file sync and share thing that popped up the last 10 years, where basically you can, before you had like file servers where you can mount a file server and have a network drive on your computer, it's all great. But nowadays we also have like laptops and smartphones and tablets and so on, which means that not everybody is like connected to the file server. We're not always in the office. We actually walk around with our devices. So then we want to synchronize your files, and you also want to share your files with people outside your organization, outside your company, your university, and so on. Yeah, and this is where this whole file sync and share functionality basically popped up the last few years. And I found it always very interesting that this is just a functionality that appeared, that this functionality is directly tied to, okay, if you want to have this functionality, you also have to sign up to this hosted service, which is proprietary, by the way. And first you have to give us all your files, and then you are able to sync it to your phone. First, you have to upload all your file, your documents, your complete file server, whatever you have, to our machine, and then we give you the right to share it with other people, which is the combination of like giving us all the data because, hey, we provide storage, which is nice. Maybe I need storage and I can buy storage, but tie this together to the functionality of synchronizing and sharing it and edit in the web interface and so on. And this is a combination which is like somehow in the mind of a lot of people belong together, but I think it doesn't. What Owncloud wants to do is give you the functionality that can work with your files, and share with your files, and sync with your files, but without the need to upload your file to the other side of the world. So this is the basic idea. And that's at the end of the day, because your question was about privacy, this also solves a lot of privacy problems, because you can decide what to do with your files. If you think that Amazon provides you lots of good storage for a reasonable price, then do this. If you think that Dropbox is good with storing your files, then you can do this. If you trust your home computer too, then you can do this. But this is independent from the synchronizing and sharing aspect, which we can get with Owncloud independently where the files actually are.
Booyah.
So I have a question there. I'm a reasonably technical person, so I've got a server in my house, and all my files are synced to it with SyncThing, and I get at them from my phone with SSH. Right now, that is not something that my dad.
That's hardcore, by the way. That's seriously hardcore. That's showing some serious nerd cred, my friend.
Well, you see, here is the thing. Right, that's not suitable for my dad to use or something. He'd be quite happy with something like Dropbox, as an example. You can imagine, but. So if I said to him, okay, use Owncloud, he'd say, well, how do I use it? And I'd say, well, you can use one of these hosted services, which means that you're storing your files on someone else's computer, just like on Dropbox, or he can set up his own server, which he doesn't know how to do. It feels like the ideal user base for Owncloud is someone who is technical enough to run their own server, but not technical enough to know what SSH is. I appreciate you've got 100 million users. I'm just surprised there are 100 million people in that position.
I don't know. I think you're limiting it too much. I don't mean to trample all over Frank. I mean, I know Frank's on from Owncloud. He should answer the friggin' Owncloud questions, but I kind of want to jump in here.
It would be nice.
So you're welcome, Frank Karlitschek, CTO of Owncloud.
Ever. So, never say that.
So
never ever say that.
So I've set up a couple of Owncloud servers, and you're right. I mean, if you're going to be setting up like a big server that a lot of people are going to use, or is going to be really publicly accessible, and it's going to be kind of high profile, you want to make sure you know what you're doing with setting up servers. But honestly, if you just plopping up a Raspberry Pi or a remote hosted server that's just going to store some of your personal files and whatnot, setting up an Owncloud server is really not much harder than, say, installing the GIMP. I mean, you run a quick, if you're using Ubuntu, an apt-get install on it, and you're like 99% of the way there, and it's really, really simple. I mean, you can do a lot more, but just doing a little bit will get you all the Dropbox functionality without really working all that hard. So I don't really know that there's a big gap there.
Here's a question then for Frank, based on that. So you can imagine some people installing Owncloud on a server in their house, whether that's a Raspberry Pi with a USB drive plugged into it, or a computer that they've got. Some people spinning up, a Bytemark virtual machine or a Linode virtual machine or something like that. Do you have a sense of what most of your Owncloud users are doing? Are they running it on their own hardware inside their house behind their firewall, which they then have to tunnel through, or are they using someone else's computer and running Owncloud on it, or what?
Yeah, honestly, I think it's all of it. So it's like we have a lot of people who really run it at home in a small machine, and we have people who run it on who use like service providers who run Owncloud, and we have people who run Owncloud server on an Amazon instance, which is an interesting thing, and other people have it on a company or use a university service. So it's a combination. And let me move a little bit more into more philosophical space here for a second. So, because it's an excellent question. So if you look at the strengths of open source and free software and what we all do, a lot is flexibility. Because if you compare this with Linux, for example, so Linux, of course, you can run a Linux distribution like Ubuntu or something on your laptop, or OpenSUSE or something installed on your laptop and directly compete with Windows and Mac OS. You can do that, and Linux obviously does very well there. But Linux is actually way more powerful because Linux also runs on very, very, very tiny devices. I don't know what the smallest Linux installation hardware is where Linux can run on, and it also runs on very, very big installations like serious mainframes and like supercomputers. And this is something where Windows or macOS doesn't run on. It doesn't scale from very tiny to very big. So this is like the strength of free software, and in a sense, it's comparable with Owncloud. You can basically set up an Owncloud and position it directly competitor to Dropbox for normal home users, as you implied in your question. But you can also say, okay, but it also runs for a service provider and also on a small box and on a NAS and on a big company server and so on. So you can do lots of it. This is why at the beginning I wouldn't say that Owncloud is it's not a clone of Dropbox or something. It's way more. And people do all kinds of things with it. And I like it. It's like giving people options. They can, for example, also migrate their data around. For example, if someone uses Owncloud and a service provider, you might ask, well, it's just a service provider that's running Owncloud. Why is this better than directly using Dropbox or Google? Well, first of all, one big aspect is if you don't like the service provider anymore, you can move to another service provider who is running the same software. You can just migrate your data. Or if you want to say, okay, I really like it, and I bought a box for it at home, and then you can migrate your Owncloud from your service provider to an Owncloud at home. It has the same functionality in a different storage, or you can use it at your company. So you have the flexibility to move around. So I don't know if there are lots of different battlefields, basically, and the flexibility is something where Owncloud and free software is very strong. Was this a very long answer to a...
No, it was crazy long. I couldn't handle how long it was.
But it was perfectly fine. So one of the things I wanted to ask you about was Owncloud is both an open source project and you run a company that relates to it as well. Mm-hmm. And from what I can tell, it's fully open source and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
How are you making money? Like, what's the business model here?
That's
because it sounds like
question. When you find out, tell us. No.
Yeah.
No. Oh, this was a joke. So
yeah.
So that's an excellent question, and it's very interesting because you have often the situation where you have a company who's doing open source. I mean, SUSE is the same, and Canonical is the same, and there's, I don't know, Red Hat, and I don't know, MariaDB, and lots of examples for that. There are different business models, and we experimented. First of all, a little bit of the history. I promise to answer this question quicker than the last one. So, I mean, Owncloud was founded by me as an open source project, like now close to 6 years ago. Actually, with no intentions of doing like a company around it. It was just a normal open source project, and like it grew a community and a user base, and worked very well. But then after like 2 years later, I and the other contributors realized that, hey, we got requests from companies who say, hey, I want to use this software in a professional enterprise way, but I need a little bit more than just a tar file from you. I need someone to talk to. I have a support question. I have a feature request. I have a consulting project. I have to, and so on and so on. And then we explored, like, together with, I have 2 co-founders, explored options to, hey, let's build a business model around it. And then we have the business model we have at the moment. It works very well for us. Is that we offer like an enterprise subscription for bigger enterprises. So you can't go to owncloud.com and get something as a home user. As a home user, we have nothing to sell to you. The open source version has everything you need. It should have all the features you need. It's not like open core that is somehow restricted or something, or shareware or trial version, I don't know. The normal open source project can do everything normal users need. For bigger enterprises, there's a few things that we offer as part of the subscription, which is like support. Like I said, there's like we help them with setting up in a bigger cluster installation. We can do consulting projects together with them. So if they need some special customization, we can help them with that. Another thing we do is dual licensing. So as you might know, Owncloud is licensed under the HEPL license, which is a very well respected open source license from the Free Software Foundation, which basically says, okay, everything I say now will be, I've got a very bad email because it's impossible to give a working definition, but I'm still trying. It basically, the HEPL basically means that if you run an Owncloud installation and you make changes, then you have to give open source the changes too. Even to the people who only use the service. So that's the HEPL, which is like a great license. This is why I picked it in the first place, because it's very fair to everybody. The problem is if you have a big enterprise and you want to connect an Owncloud to proprietary services. So, for example, there's a connector to SharePoint, or there's a connector to some Oracle, LDAP, whatever server, and stuff like that. Then this is a problem. Because, well, then this would require that these connectors and all the backend services and the custom user management, the blah, 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 whatever they have, also needs to be open source, and that's not possible. And because of that, we offer dual licensing, which means people who get an enterprise subscription from us get Owncloud under a license that doesn't require to open source the changes that you make. This is basically for this integration part. So there are lots of different things that basically we help bigger enterprises to be successful with Owncloud. That's our business model. Awesome. Well, Frank, we really appreciate you you coming on the show and sharing your insight on Owncloud. And it sounds like a great project. And I haven't tried it personally, but I think some of you guys have tried it, right? Still running it today. Yeah. It's amazing. Well, I, as has been outlined, I put my tax returns in a shoebox on my doorstep. That's so, right. I forget. I have no need Thank you for reminding me. I'm sorry. Such as Owncloud. But yeah, people can go and where can people find out more and check it out? Yeah, so owncloud.org is the website where you can find lots of information about the latest version. You can download it from there. Obviously, it's offered as a tar or zip file. We have Linux packages. We have a virtual machine where everything is pre-configured if you prefer that. There are links to service providers who offer Owncloud, lots of options. If you want to contribute, like I said, we are an open source project. We have over 850 contributors at the moment. You can find us on GitHub. Jono, I think I heard about GitHub lately. I heard.
Yeah, you're gonna be hearing a lot more about it in the future.
Oh dear God!
really love GitHub. It's not open source. You should fix that, by the way. But
I'll do that on my first day.
Obviously. No, if you go to github.com/owncloud, then you can see all the code and all the bugs and pull requests. And if you want to contribute, then please go there and help pushing Owncloud forward.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Frank. Great seeing you. Keep up the great work, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks a lot.
One of the things that happens when you're part of the open source world is you are constantly bombarded by open source related organisations saying you have to help us fight against this particular law or this particular thing that's coming in. I mean, recently on the show we've talked about attempting to ban open source firmware in routers, for example. You get constant requirements from government saying we're going to mandate Microsoft software everywhere, or that everyone has to use DOCX format or whatever, right? And it feels to me like we're always on the back foot here. It's always some big proprietary company or government or something attempting to legislate everything we do out of existence, and we must turn our web pages black or march in the streets or send emails to our congressman or our MP or whatever complaining about this stuff. And it struck me, why not fight fire with fire, right? Why aren't the EFF and organisations like them constantly introducing new bills at country level, in the States at state and federal level, constantly trying to bring things into local government, into big organisations, whatever, saying you have to use ODT format, you must use open source software, all audio must be released as OGG Theora. All software must be open source. You must open your data.
Well, let's not go that far with the OGG Theora bit, man. Like all the other ones, I'm on board, but not
OGG Theora. Fine, I grant you that. Yes, yeah, no problem. WebM would be fine with me. Right?
What's wrong with OGG Theora? It's great.
But why aren't we constantly introducing bills to say that the firmware on phones that you release can't be closed source, or you can't release closed source drivers or whatever? Sure, I mean, almost none of these bills would pass. None of them would actually happen, but it would mean that instead of us constantly having to run as fast as we can just to stay in the position we're in, we'd have everyone else running as fast as they can, and every now and again, one would slip through.
At least at the federal level, your question has a one-word answer, and that one-word answer is lobbying, right? You can't just introduce a bill. At least in the U.S., I don't know how it works in England, but in the U.S., right, it takes a member of Congress to introduce a bill. It's usually preferred that it's more than one congressman. They'd like to have a co-sponsor, at least one co-sponsor. From there, it's referred to the committee that is in charge of the jurisdiction over the primary issue of what that legislation entails, right? And from there, the chairman can out of hand make it go away. If the chairman determines that there will be a hearing, there's a hearing on the bill, the entire committee goes through it. If there's any amendments, after those are adopted or rejected or whatever it is, the chairman then moves a vote to get voted on by the committee. If the committee then approves it, it goes a huge committee report and all this stuff goes out, and then it goes to the floor. Once it goes to the floor, depending if it's Senate or House, you can filibuster it. There's a whole bunch of things that can happen there. If it passes one chamber, it then has to go to the other chamber. If there's a single change at all, even if it's one word, they then have to conference by both chambers and redo it all again. And then it's sent to the president, who can veto it, and then it comes back to the House, and if they have a majority, they can
override the veto. Yeah,
they can overrule it.
What?
So there are so many places that if you don't have a huge amount of lobbying dollars, that things can just get rejected out of hand. Yeah. That it wouldn't be a concern to the big companies. It's not a thing that can happen.
I was going to say, I imagine that the
infrastructure.
You could arguably have the EFF playing a lobbying role and traversing that system, at least like Jeremy says in the US. It's different it's certainly different in England.
Yeah.
But the amount of money that they would need, and I get the impression,
huge.
I mean, I don't know about you guys, I'm an EFF supporter. I think they do really important work.
They do.
But I get the impression that they're struggling just to do what they're doing now in terms of funds, let alone to be able to do that, because that would cost millions and millions of dollars.
Realistically, billions.
And there's no tangible outcome.
Billions, yeah.
So,
Billions is the
billions.
Yeah, it's a far more correct number, which with the point I think Jeremy is so eloquently making is that our democracy is broken and we should probably all vote for Lawrence Lessig for president to fix all of this garbage, and then we can probably maybe get a couple of bills through about open source.
I'm not sure I agree with you. I understand what you're saying, and I understand the thing. But if that was honestly the case, if it's just literally a matter of lobbying dollars, then there'd be no point in asking all of us to write to our congressman to fight back against this stuff. They would say, okay, open source community, we need to fight back against this open source firmware in routers law. The way you can contribute to that is give us $20. No point in calling anybody, no point in turning your web pages black, no point in tweeting about it, nothing. Just give us money. That's the only thing that matters. And that's not
in the case of
SOPA,
so many people got involved that I think some congressmen did listen, but to Brian's point, in most of the cases, does not matter at all.
It doesn't matter.
Not even a little bit.
I mean, it really, in the United States at least, it just doesn't matter most of the time. The big
really is
corporate
dollars.
They control all of it. All of it. What the congressmen and the senators do, they control. I mean, they just
especially if you look at
money.
how the bills are written, they are clearly not written by congressmen. They are written by people in the industry who have a very specific
and the thing is,
design.
as well as using the, I mean, it's probably a bit harsh to just talk about the EFF specifically, because there's a bunch of organizations that are looking to improve our quality of life digitally, but using them as an example, they're a pretty smart group of people. I'm almost certain they've sat around a table and fleshed out all of the different options that they've got in terms of how they can accomplish their goals.
Sure.
And I would argue that, I would imagine, I'm guessing here, that they've basically identified that encouraging like-minded people who support the EFF to make a big public noise about it is probably the most cost-effective way of raising the issue, so it gets more press attention, and then it becomes something that the people expect their politicians to account for. And, you know, over the years, protesting and, in some cases, civil disobedience has proven to be an effective tool in that way. I can't think what else they do.
You see, my problem with that is I agree it's proven to be effective, but the reason a lot of people pursue it is because it's cheap. Right? Which means that if you're a one-man fight back against this law campaign, then all you can do is mobilise people because you haven't got any money. Right? But Red Hat have got $2 billion. I'm not suggesting Red Hat fund this all by themselves, not for a moment. But we've got
that's a great idea. I'm totally on board with this now.
We've got an awful lot of companies
Jim Whitehurst,
involved
he needs to pull this all together. No, let's focus on this. We do have, actually, we've got Red Hat, we've got Cisco, we've got IBM, we've got some pretty significant powerhouses monetarily that are heavily invested in the open source side of things.
Right.
What if we had some sort of a consortium pulled together by the EFF of all these big companies, and if a letterhead drops on your senator's desk with IBM, Red Hat, Cisco, Intel, all down the line saying, we want this, by the way, we contribute to you,
but
then
those
that might start to
companies
get some attention.
Just because those companies invest in open source, I mean, even Red Hat, right? I have a tremendous amount of respect for Red Hat and a tremendous amount of respect for Jim Whitehurst, but even that them as an organization, it will be hard for them to take a hard line on this kind of stuff, because bear in mind that they're doing business with governments, with big business, the kind of people who the EFF flavored legislation would potentially be bad for business. And that would be Red Hat.
Right, I'm not
with
suggesting
IBM and Cisco, it would be even worse.
I'm not suggesting they take a hard line on this. I mean, Red Hat do not have to, every time a corporate person comes in the door, go, nah, man, we hate corporate people, get stuff, we don't want your money. Just fund people to do things like introduce loads of these bills. And you don't have to do it all at the federal level in the US. I mean, if you are required to publish documents in an open format, if you're doing an official government document in Indiana, that's a victory by itself. Right?
It's true.
If you're required to do it in the West Midlands or in Lyon in France,
no, not the West Midlands.
Also a victory. No. Right? I mean, yes, I would love to see a world where someone sticks a bill into the US House of Representatives who says all software has to be open source. It gets passed, and Apple go, well, damn it, okay, here is OS X on GitHub. But clearly that's not going to happen. Steps. But the point here is not to come up with one all-swooping, all-winning silver bullet thing. It's to have a constant stream of things that the other side have to fight back against, rather than us constantly fighting back against them.
Do you like the fact that the other side does that?
No. That's why the segment's called Fighting Fire with Fire.
If you become something you don't like in the pursuit of winning, have you really won?
Yeah, the reason the segment is called Fighting Fire with Fire rather than Fighting Marshmallows with Marshmallows is because, right?
I think if you lose who you are fundamentally in the pursuit of winning, you've probably lost.
I don't necessarily. No, the reason I don't like the fact that they're doing that is it feels that they are unfairly using a tool they know how to use and we don't. Right? I don't think it's fundamentally unreasonable to attempt to legislate someone else out of existence. I wish you weren't allowed to do that, but given that you are, it behooves us to understand how to use this tool as well as the opposition do. Otherwise, they're choosing the playing field every time, and we keep bloody losing.
And again, Stuart, I think is kind of onto something here, despite being Stuart. And I think if you start small, start in local municipalities, say simple things like, let's standardize on this file format for this sort of work within government offices and interoperation with government offices. And those sorts of laws are all over the place all the time already. Let's just make it so that some of those are pitched for, open standards and open source, and make it more geared towards that. Those will be fought against, and those will almost invariably lose for all the reasons Jeremy laid out very eloquently earlier. But at least we're getting them on there. And I don't think that that's really losing who we are as a person. Now, as a community, if we start just going crazy about it and saying, full nuclear, all software better be free and open source, and Microsoft should be shoved off a cliff. I mean, we don't go nuclear on it, we go nice. We're the good guys here. We're proposing open standards, not even open source, just start with open standards. And if open standards are the standard across the land, then open source invariably follows that. That's a very easy thing.
Yeah.
You know what?
That seems much more reasonable.
I'm reading a book right now called Obliquity, which is actually quite cool. It's written by this economist, and the principle of the book is that if you look at the great accomplishments in the world, they've been accomplished usually indirectly. So if you look, for example, at big companies, the companies that have invariably been successful have not gone out to derive shareholder value for those companies. That's not been the singular focus. It's been to build a better airplane or something like that, and then the shareholder value comes afterwards. And I would say that the way in which we get, for example, the primary focus I would imagine here is going to be around open standards in government and public institutions. Right. The way in which we do that is going to be indirectly. So, yes, you could arguably put a bunch of money into the EFF and go out there and lobby directly on those issues. But as we all know, so much of the politics that's done in Washington or in London, for example, is done in relationship building with different politicians and how they do their work. Like, that's one of the reasons why I think Obama's done a really good job around the open government stuff since he's been in. Is that the impression I get from talking to a few people who work on that is that a lot of that came around pretty indirectly. It wasn't, we have to do this because it's the right thing. It was, we can derive this value from having these open government programs, and that might help us with these other things. So to me, it's like, it's how you map out that path indirectly. So in the same way that Bill Gates said when he became a philanthropist, he said, the work that he's doing to get rid of, I think it's malaria and polio, is not about how much money he's putting in. It's the fact that because he's Bill Gates, it opens up meetings that never existed for a lot of other charities before. So to me, that's what the EFF should be doing. It's not about just lobbing money into lobbyists.
I suspect the EFF are doing Bill Gates. I'm guessing the EFF do that because certainly the ORG, the Open Rights Group, do that in the UK, right? If you consider them the UK's EFF, they certainly do. They get invited to discussion things in Parliament, and they're invited experts, and they spend a lot of time hanging out with the parliamentary party and things like that in order to build those relationships and be an invited expert, and that's great. But it's still very much a kind of, well, when we want the open source world's opinions, we'll get you in to talk about them. But they're not. But we're not pushing for things. I mean, every day you see ridiculous new things where it's, you're not going to be able to buy blank CDs anymore without paying an extra £2 fee in case you put an MP3 on them, kind of thing, right? Why are we not just introducing equally insane things in the other direction?
Yeah. You want to be aggressive. You don't want to be a passive guy. Let me end with this thought, this little thought worm in everyone's head. What if we all got together and produced a piece of malware that infected the routers of all of the lobbyists looking for proposed bills, and anytime a proposed bill came through that referenced a file format or source code, we inject that it has to be ODF, open source, etc. So there is no way for them to submit a bill that doesn't include that information. Good idea or great idea?
I'm gonna go ahead and end this on a little more realistic ending here. As it,
you didn't like that one?
No, I loved it. But I think part of the issue here that maybe we're overlooking because we are four fairly like-minded people, at least in this very specific context, is that because we live in a republic, or at least the three of us do, and the majority of people just don't care about this. Congressmen and even local politicians across the board don't have to care about this because they'll still get elected by not caring. So I think that's a more fundamental problem, and that's where it goes back to what the EF tries to do sometimes in getting broader public support, is if you get broad public support, then politicians have to care. Where a lot of the topics we're talking about here are so niche to the tech community, while super important and everyone should care, most people just don't.
No, but no one cares on the other side either. No one is sitting about
big companies
not caring about technology, saying to themselves, man, I wish someone would restrict the software that my router can run. They're not thinking about it at all. So they're not in favour of the things that are being introduced with these laws either.
The only way to fight those lobbying dollars would be the politician realistically thinking he or she won't get elected by having that certain position. Right. That's the only way you can fight lobbying dollars. And this particular topic, people don't care.
To Jeremy's point, what we need to do is, do you remember, like in the 80s, recycling was only done by environmentalist nutters, right? And now recycling is part of like just being a human being. That's just what's part of life. We need to transition these issues to be from,
fringe,
technology kind of lunatics who dye their hair green to something that our parents care about for the welfare of their children.
I am astounded at how cynical you lot are. I really am. I thought that was me.
I would call it realism, but...
Hey, I'm all for you. I'm right on board with this, Stuart, and I'm ready to write some malware. If you would like to write malware to infect the United States Senate, head on over to community.badvoltage.org.
No, don't go there. No, don't go there at all. Go to community.linuxactionshow.org.
I don't even know if they have one of those. Let's wrap this up. I really do want to hear what people think about this. Are there good strategies that just aren't being enacted right now? Is Stuart right that we could fight fire with fire like this? Is Jono right that we just simply need more marshmallows? What is it that we need? Head on over to community.badvoltage.org, whatever the word I just said, you know it, and go there and chat about it with words.
Right, so who's done anything this week other than go to All Things Open and then ceaselessly go on and on and on and on and on about it like a broken record?
I would say that one reference in an entire show is it's by definition not going on. You need it to be more than one reference to be the bare minimum of going on.
Hey, Jono. Have you ever heard of GitHub or Community?
Unfamiliar with both.
Unfamiliar. Okay, so how was All Things Open?
So I think I should talk about All Things. Now you've brought it up. I wasn't going to mention it.
I cat out of the bag. Thanks, Stuart.
So I got invited to go out to this event called All Things Open, which is in Raleigh in North Carolina. And had you guys really heard of this event beforehand?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Yep.
Because I'd heard of it, but I didn't really know anything about it. And didn't know anyone who'd really been to it. And they had a great speaker lineup. When I first looked at the website, like a lot of people who I know and I respect in the open source world, and it was just, it's a community run event, and it was just really good. It was, the way I kind of look at events is that you've got on the far left, you've got kind of really community-orientated events like Ohio Linux Fest. And then on the far right of the scale, you've got things like OSCON, right, which more kind of commercially orientated events.
Yeah.
And Scale is kind of like a little bit to the middle of that. All Things Open, I'd say, is a little bit to the right of the middle. And it was just a
which
really
way is
great
right? Is right is the corporate side?
Right, it's towards the
towards
OSCON
us,
side of things.
So it's more
it's
corporate
kind of like,
than community, but it's still community enough.
Yeah. It's definitely more. It's definitely more of a commercially oriented event than Scale, for example. Even though Scale is a great commercially oriented event as well, but it was just the content was great. The guy who runs it is this guy called Todd, who's like literally the nicest guy in the world I think I've ever met. He's one of those people that apologizes for things he really has no need to apologize for all the time.
And Taurus's crown has been usurped so quickly.
If you listen very carefully, you can hear Taurus crying his eyes out and now only being the second nicest man in open source.
I don't have a lot of sympathy towards Taurus because on the first day I didn't have anything to do, and on the second day I was doing one of the 15-minute keynotes in the morning, and I had a lightning talk and a main talk that day. So I had like a big day ahead of me, and the night before, Taurus was like, I've got loads of bourbon in my room. Come and help me drink it. And I was like, no, dude, I'm going to be responsible tonight. And he just would not stop pushing. He was like a drug pusher.
Did you give in to peer pressure?
No, I didn't. I
you
held
totally
strong.
Did. You gave in.
And Jessie was there. She was pushing as well, and like some of the other OpenNMS people. So anyway, I just wanted to say, it's a great event for people. Obviously, our audience is people who are interested in open source. It's well worth checking out. So
if you're looking for a conference to attend in 357 days.
Right. Immensely deft segue coming up here. No. Before you go on, if you're looking for a conference to attend this weekend, and you're in the UK, go to OggCamp.
OggCamp.
Which is in Liverpool this weekend. I'm there. I'm speaking. In fact, I'm on a podcasters panel, so I'm representing the three of you as well. Nice. So be prepared. But that should actually be...
Can we change that so you're not on the panel?
I was invited to be on the panel.
For this.
Maybe I'll just talk about...
You didn't fill in a work...
I'll talk about shots of
You didn't fill in
Jack.
a work order form.
But yes, so I'm going to be at OggCamp this weekend. Go to oggcamp.org to find out about it. If you're listening to this on Thursday, it's like tomorrow morning. So,
it is. OggCamp is the best conference in the UK that isn't like Radio Live. So... It's actually quite cool. I only went to the first one, I think.
How many people go to OggCamp?
It's some hundreds. I'm not sure about the exact numbers. You'd have to ask actual OggCamp people, but I think it was 400 or 500, something like that.
So it's not just a couple of guys in a bar. Like, I kind of always got the impression that OggCamp was really just they go to a bar. I thought that was kind of what it was.
No. It's a big deal. Exhibition things.
I would say it's the...
People coming in and out.
I would say it's the Ohio Linux Fest of the UK.
So still heavily focused on drinking, right?
Yeah, a lot of drinking, but also very community orientated. And is it in Liverpool again?
Yes, it's in Liverpool, and it's not just about open source. It's there's a lot of free culture stuff going on there as well. So it's not specifically software, but it's very it's still very technology focused, as you can imagine.
Who else is on the podcasters panel? I'm assuming Popey is from the Ubuntu UK show.
I believe Alan Pope is, yes, or it might be Laura Cowan from Ubuntu Podcast. Joe Ressington is moderating it. He does about 325 different podcasts. I believe he might be. And someone, I think Graham from the Linux Voice podcast and the Linux Voice magazine, but it might be Ben or it might be all of them. Mike, I'm not sure.
That's cool.
Graham, lovely guy.
Yes,
lovely guy.
They're all lovely people at Linux Voice. Although, if I had a complaint, it would be if I'm buying the digital version of your magazine, why do I have to fill my address and phone number in order to renew my subscription?
Probably for billing
Goodness
purposes.
Gracious.
Yeah, do you have to, does it pay for it with your credit card?
No, I pay for it with
I
pay for it with PayPal, which means I don't need an address.
Fair.
Well, then that's a legitimate concern.
It is.
So, in other words, don't go and support Linux Voice magazine. It's a horrible outfit.
No, they're really great, Linux Voice. They're good people.
They are pretty great. I wanted to make mention before we ended the show, and I know we don't necessarily need to be talking about Bryan all that much, but I would like to talk momentarily about Scale because I would like more people to be there knowing full well what to expect. At the Southern California Linux Expo, I will be doing my Linux Sucks Dog and Pony show this year, but it's going to be extremely hardcore. Professional film crews, crazy production values. This is something people are going to want to be there for, and the room that I'll be in is just huge. It's like a 700-800 person room, and I believe it's happening on Thursday night on January 21st. So in Pasadena, California, if you're in the whole region of North America there, which is within distance, striking range of Pasadena, get the frick to Pasadena that time. Now, I think there's a lot going on at Scale. I think there's like the UbuntuCon, the UbuCon is going on Thursday and Friday there at Scale.
Speaking, right?
So the night of the first day of UbuCon and Scale, that Thursday, I'll be taking the stage, and you're going to definitely want to be there. It is going to be so choice, guys. Like ridiculous.
And you heard it here first. There's going to be an actual dog and a real pony.
That would be brilliant.
Are you like a featured
fancy
speaker? It's just you and Cory Doctorow, and that's it, which is pretty cool.
Yeah. Oh, it's so interesting that you brought that up, Stuart. If you go to the Southern California Linux Expo webpage, which is SoCalLinuxExpo.org, there are 2 featured speakers listed, Cory Doctorow and Bryan Lunduke, right next to each other, which really makes me feel fancy.
Well,
because
there is another thing.
Cory is so much more worthwhile than I am that it makes me feel like I'm special.
Gareth or Alon about this, I think.
Yeah,
I was going to say, I mean, while I'm happy for you, Bryan, I'm now worried for Scale because they're obviously not able to get into
well, that's the thing. That's the thing that should be brought up there. It's today, as we record this, is Wednesday the 28th of October. Tomorrow, when the show comes out, will be Thursday the 29th of October. The following day, Friday the 30th, is the closing date for the Scale call for papers. So if you want to speak at Scale, you've got like one day to get your proposal in. Presumably, the reason Bryan and Cory are featured speakers is because everyone else hasn't even put in a submission yet. But the reason I know all about the submission date is I have been repeatedly told I should submit a paper for Scale, and I haven't done it yet, and I've got 48 hours. So
yeah, same here. I haven't submitted mine yet to it, man.
So I need to actually decide what I'm going to talk about that people want to hear me talk about, and then actually write it up and get it submitted at some point in the next day or so. So if you're listening to this show and you want to go to Scale and give a talk, you need to get in really, really quickly.
Yeah, apparently it's super easy to become a featured speaker too. So just throw something at them and they'll put you up there.
All you have to do is dedicate a lifetime to working for open source, have a bunch of stupid glasses, or be Cory Doctorow. So
well, actually, yeah,
maybe wittering on every day the Scale organizers also will help. Before we wrap up,
I was going to say our plan to have this be a short outro has failed spectacularly.
Right. Okay. So that was a horrible slur against Bryan.
Just a little bit, I have to say.
But it did make me smile, so it's okay.
So. Just wrapping up as well, in final event-related news, we are going to be announcing, hopefully in the next show, and possibly before the next show, our next live performance of Bad Voltage with all 4 of us. It's going to be super cool. It's going to be sponsored by Linode. We can share that, but we will be sharing the specific date and location and event that it's at, hopefully pretty soon. So stay tuned for that.
Radical.
Should we wrap it up?
I already did. I stopped recording like a half hour ago.
All right. So through the magic of ego, we still get this into the show.
Did anyone notice, by the way, that Jono did a keynote All Things Open? Didn't just do a talk, keynote. I didn't know that, but it was mentioned, so now I do know about it.
It was relevant. It's relevant.
Well, to be fair, it was a 15-minute keynote.
Right, it was a 15-minute, which most keynotes are. But hang on a second. So, Bryan, you're a featured speaker.
Yeah.
I'm a keynote speaker. So, Langridge, what are you going to do to, keep your head above water in here? Jeremy's just got the intellect, right? He has he brings facts to the show. You bring nothing other than ginger hair. What are you going to actually bring to keep your head above water?
I look forward to you publishing the show when I take the script away.
Bollocks. That's fair. That's fair. Yeah, please keep Robo Stuart.
So scared of Stuart sometimes.
People pay me for my expertise for a reason. They just pay you to tweet about stuff, so I should shut up if I was you, arse person.
That was pretty unfair.
Wow.
That was unfair, but I'm looking forward to you tweeting about GitHub.
This is turning into like
fine note. Thanks for listening.
This is turning into Thunderdome. We should wrap it up. See you later.
I love Tina Turner.